IVM.
Welcome to Police Chowki, a special limited series on your favorite public policy podcast, All Things Policy. This series will take you behind the khaki uniform, beyond the flashing red beacon, and into the heart of the functioning of the Indian police force. We cast a critical eye on the role and function of the police in the Indian democracy, from the silent persistence of paperwork and meticulous investigation to risky counterterrorism efforts and policing in conflict zones. We explore the need for police reform and accountability in the system. Each episode brings you a comprehensive exploration of a unique facet of policing, illuminated by the insights of a former IPS officer who has lived the life behind the badge. So join us every Monday morning as we take you into the complex world of Police Chowki.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Police Chowki. I'm your host Shrikrishna Upadhyaya, and my guest today on the show is former IPS officer and former DGP of Uttar Pradesh, Mr. Javeed Ahmad. Mr. Ahmad, welcome back to Police Chowki.
Good evening, Sri, and it's good to be back and a very interesting topic coming up today.
Right. So today, Mr. Ahmad and I are going to be talking about policing in conflict zones, and we're going to be looking at the problem of policing, particularly in areas which is full of extremism, militancy, civil strife, communal strife, and so on, from different angles, and trying to unpack as to how exactly policing can work in such situations and the efforts that our police officers put in maintaining law and order in such situations. So to begin with, I thought just for a bit of a historical context, Mr. Ahmed, India has actually witnessed separatism over the last 7 decades or so. It has witnessed militancy in various regions across the country. The foremost examples which come to our mind are the Punjab insurgency during the 80s and early 90s, the Jammu Kashmir insurgency, which picked up in the 90s and it continues in some form or the other today as well as insurgencies in northeastern states, Manipur, Nagaland, Mizoram, Assam. All of these states have witnessed their fair share of militancy. Other than this, we have also had left-wing extremist movements in central India, many of which are still alive. States like Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand are still affected. Other than this, from time to time, India has also witnessed communal and sectarian strife, which has gotten out of hand, leading to rioting and long drawn-out conflicts, which cause damage to life, liberty, and property. So, in this picture of conflict zones which have erupted over time across the country, Mr. Ahmed, I want to know from you, what are your thoughts on this from a policing perspective? What has been the most challenging conflict our country has to face, and are there any success stories which you would like to point out?
Yes, Sri, you listed out quite a few of the conflict areas or the conflict flashpoints that the country has had to face over the last 75 years. As far as the success stories are concerned, I would say that there are many success stories, but the ones that stand out are the kind of success the police and the law enforcement forces have achieved in Punjab, in Tripura, and in the Northeast generally, which, as we all know, was very strife prone and strife ridden for a very long time. I would also say that the ability of the Indian police forces across the states to broadly handle the communal and the caste conflagrations that happen, once in a while, has been reasonably good. Their record has been reasonably good. I would, for example, go back to the communal tension and heightened, law and order problems that we faced in the immediate aftermath of the demolition of the Babri Masjid in 1992. I was SP in one of the districts of UP, and as you know, UP was very much the center of all that was happening. The ability of the state police in UP to handle that kind of very, very charged atmosphere and broadly get away with very limited loss of life and property. I think these are very important lessons for the future, and they show that the police has the capacity and the resilience to deliver the goods, given the right kind of political freedom. I would definitely like to mention Punjab. Punjab, as we all know, was in a very bad state for a long time in the 90s and early in the 80s. But a very clear-cut policy by the government of India and similarly by the government in Punjab. Very good leadership by people like Julio Ribeiro and KPS Gill, and the kind of clarity of purpose and focus that was given to the force. And they were able to win back the confidence of the Jat peasantry, which was the backbone of the whole Khalistan movement in Punjab. Those are remarkable success stories. I would also quickly talk about the Tripura example, where once again the insurgency in Tripura was largely contained by police action, where on the one hand there was a lot of identification and action against the mischief mongers. Hand in hand, the police was able to build bridges with civic society and bring them over to talks and some kind of resolution of their demands. Similarly, in the other states of the Northeast, Mizoram being one very good example, where intelligence-based policing, where the police forces and the intelligence department operatives were able to, infiltrate the movement of the separatists and then bring them down on the table for talks. And ultimately, we now have for a reasonably long time a certain amount of peace and acceptance of the sovereignty of the Indian state by the people of Mizoram. So these are success stories. I'm sure there are many other success stories. I am not denying that there have been slip ups by the Indian police in various theaters. But there are a number of success stories that the Indian police needs to be satisfied about and even happy about.
Right. Yeah, I will come to the part where you talked about broadening the engagement with the civil society and winning them over, as well as some of the slip ups that have happened over the years. But before that, I wanted to sort of double click on the success story of fighting left wing extremism in the country, right? The Naxalite movement, which started off in the late 60s and spread across central India. I still remember at one point you had several states which were affected, starting from West Bengal, Bihar, Jharkhand, parts of Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh. Districts in Maharashtra, Andhra, Telangana, and even in Karnataka. But I think around half a decade and a half ago, the government launched Operation Green Hunt to sort of like tackle this problem. And over the decade or so, the left-wing extremism has been contained to some districts in some of these states, mostly located in Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and Odisha. So, would you rate this as a success? What are your thoughts on this?
The state action against left wing extremism, goes back to the early 70s when this whole thing started as a peasant movement in Naxalbari and engulfed much of West Bengal. If you recall, at that time, the Naxals were very, very active, not only in the rural areas, but also in the urban areas. At that time, the government in West Bengal came down very heavily on such elements. There was use of force. There were allegations of extrajudicial killings and such like, and more or less, that problem was resolved in the state of West Bengal, and a reasonably large proportion of those people who were into violence came into the political mainstream in some form or the other and started fighting elections. Now, once you get into the mainstream of elections, etc., it's a political activity, and the state welcomes that kind of thing, where the normal legal channels of expressing your opinion and seeking the mandate of the people is utilized to further a particular cause or ideology or thought process. Now, when Bengal was kind of freed of the Naxal problem, it spread to other parts of the country, especially undivided Bihar and Odisha, and what is now Chhattisgarh and some parts of Maharashtra, as you said. Now, the whole left wing extremism issue is a complex one where the reasons are multi pronged. One is the inability of the state, the incapacity of the state to reach the deep to reach the villages and communities living deep in the villages, and provide to them what they were providing, what the state was providing to the other people who are closer to the roads. So these people were deprived of food, of education, of electricity, and of roads and such other facilities or infrastructure, which normally the state should have been able to provide. Added to that was that in these areas, which are mostly forested, there were groups which were called mafias who were exploiting the forest resources and not allowing the traditional rights of the tribals who were living there. So, and added to that was that the police forces, if and when they landed up, they would rather side with those who had money and influence rather than with the person who was being oppressed. So, with that kind of history, a particular ideology which talked about liberating the poor tribal from these day-to-day problems that he had been facing, of their women being molested and all that. So any ideology that had that kind of promise was bound to get some kind of support from the target group. So with that kind of background, the left-wing extremism had a particular kind of support, a particular level of support among the populace. Now, once the state started responding, the initial response was purely, responding to one violence, but through state violence. And then it was realized that while state violence can stop a particular person or a group of persons from disturbing the peace, there has to be a multi-pronged approach whereby the developmental process has to reach these areas. And that was the way that, for example, Andhra Pradesh and what is now Telangana and Maharashtra and other places, even parts of Uttar Pradesh, were able to make dent into the support that the Naxals and the left-wing extremists had among the people. In terms of providing education, setting up of schools, of dispensaries, hospitals, accessibility, roads, electricity, and such other things. So this multi-pronged approach of development, of reaching out, of taking people into the political process, along with the use of police forces, where there were individuals who are bent upon using violence. This multi-pronged approach has been responsible for restricting the left-wing extremist action now to a very limited number of districts.
Right. Yeah, that's very fascinating. And of course, it's a complex bouquet of problems which are mostly socio-economic in nature. And the solution lies in the political domain, in developmental domain. But of course, the focus of our conversation now is security and policing, right? So I want to sort of go into this angle of the important decision any state makes as to deployment of the troops, right? So in any given conflict, in say a communal riot has broken out, or there is a long drawn out sectarian strife which is going on. Maybe let's just take the contemporary example of what is happening in Manipur, which is essentially an ethnic conflict. So in such situations, there's a lot of call and clamor among media and elsewhere that the police is incapable of handling the situation. So we need to call in the army. We need intervention by the union's armed forces to keep peace and take control of the situations. And this sometimes becomes a very popular demand. So I want to know from you in terms of decision making within the government, right? So what are the criteria or what are the considerations which guide the state's decision to deploy police forces as opposed to, say, the army or other military troops, right? And also, a related question is how do these two entities differ in their rules of engagement and how they interact with local communities and so on?
Yeah. So the first thing that needs to be said here is that whether it is the army or the central forces, it is part of their mandate to assist the state administration in maintenance of law and order as and when required, as and when they are invited to do so by the state through the district magistrate. So it's not something that is beyond their charter. Secondly, as far as when they are invited, when they are requested to come in, and why they are requested to come in, I think the first thing that needs to be understood is that here is a force, whether it is, for example, the CRP, which is asked to come in, or in very serious situations or dire situations, the army is asked to come in. The first point is that this is a dedicated set of people who have no other responsibility during that period but to, maintain order in terms of doing patrolling or guarding of vulnerable points, etc. So, number one is the fact that boots on the ground are made available by either the CRP or, as I said, in dire situations by the army. So, boots on the ground is one very important thing. Secondly, because the police has ultimately to be there in that local environment, it is there before this incident has taken place, and it will be there after this incident has been the fires have been doused. They feel there's a feeling that they are unable to show the kind of objectivity that is required, and the kind of strict application of law that is required, because they have many other linkages which have survived from the past and which need to survive for the future, because ultimately that community has to live, and the police has to live in that environment itself. So a sort of independent or a less invested force, whether it is the CRP or the army, comes in, does a limited job of preventing further violence and ensuring that tempers get slightly cooled down, and then that's it. They go back, and then the police comes back and does the routine policing of prosecution, of building bridges between communities, and ensuring that life returns to normal, and that the animosity and the tensions that have developed between the communities because of a particular incident, or it could be political or otherwise, is then that the political process starts to come into the picture.
Right. So let's assume for a minute that in a particular situation, the government has taken the decision of containing the situation by using police force, right? By deploying the local police. So I want to know from a tactical perspective, how does the police try to diffuse the violence under such a situation, and over time make a return back to the normalcy? I assume police would have a range of options, right? Of course, a bunch of it is related to information and messaging. And of course, the final option would be a total crackdown by the police force. So, what do the range of options in terms of tactics that are available for the police? And at what point does the police employ a particular option?
So, the first thing that I would like to say is that the solution is ultimately a civic solution. It cannot be a military or a police solution. So that has to be understood. Once that is kept in focus, then we come to how this is achieved. The first thing, if there's a conflict situation, the first thing that the police has to ensure is that the conflict is contained. that there is no more violence, there are no more killings or rapes or burning of property, etc., etc. Because the more of such activities that happen, it becomes that much more difficult for some kind of rapprochement to happen at a later stage. That's the first thing, to stop further violence between the two groups, that the two groups don't damage each other's property or cause damage to loss of life or limb. That's the first thing. So the first thing is to be there right in the middle when the two groups are fighting and prevent further fighting. Once that is achieved, then the second thing that needs to be done is to understand who are the people who were actually involved in the violence of, or whether it is murder or rape or burning or arson or whatever. Because identifying those people is important. A, because the rule of law has to prevail. B, because when the culprit is identified and arrested and sent to jail, it gives a sense of justice to those who have been oppressed, or those who have been, whose property has been burnt, or or family has been killed or whatever. So that sense of justice is important, because it increases the trust that people and the community have in the police force, that yes, this police force is there and it is effective enough to identify the arsonists or the troublemakers, and those are being put behind bars. Third thing then is to find senior elements within both the communities or both the warring groups, and start the dialogue process. Because ultimately, as I said, it has to be a civic solution. The civic solution involves that at some stage, people who are right now fighting, the senior elements within them are identified. They are brought on the table, and some kind of peace or truce, whatever you want to call it, is hammered out, so that normal life starts. And once normal life starts, the old linkages, networks start operating, and people realize that their future is linked to their living in peace. And obviously, certain give and take happens. People have to forget, people have to forgive. There are some who do not do so. So for that, issues have to take a slightly longer time to get resolved. But ultimately, people have to be brought together so that they start talking. And when they start talking, then solutions start to emerge, because senior elements obviously are able to slowly take the forefront. And it is the police's job to kind of chaperone this process.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to know a little bit more about when you say it's the police's job to chaperone this process. So, in an actual sort of hostile situation, I mean, say after the actual violence is contained, do police senior leadership play a role in brokering peace between the communities? Are they engaged in meetings? Do they get people together on the table? Like, how does it work at a pure grassroots level?
Absolutely. At the district level, let us say, I can say from personal experience that on a number of occasions when two communities have been at war with each other, and after the initial frenzy of violence has been contained, and people who are the troublemakers have been identified and arrested, etc. The police, normally at the Thana level or at a slightly senior level, starts the informal and formal meetings between the two groups. And obviously, this is a very closely monitored and modulated by the senior officers. And then at some stage, it is the senior officers who sit down with members of the warring groups or the warring communities and try to bring some kind of agreement between them about what is to be forgiven, what is to be forgotten, and how life can go on despite what has happened in the recent past. So this is a process that most people who are in the field as SPs or as commissioners would have gone through multiple times in their lives, in their careers.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
Right, but I was wondering, whenever there is a cycle of violence which leads to another cycle of violence and it escalates so on in a conflict, it may so happen that the police also end up losing control of the situation, or maybe just out of pure frustration are unable to act as per rule of law, so to speak. And there have been many instances where the police are seen as going overboard and inflicting unnecessary pain and humiliation upon the population just in their quest to find the culprits, and so on. In fact, in central India, some places it has become a routine occurrence for entire villages to be forced out by police and people being evacuated to temporary camps and so on, in the name of security and maintaining law and order. Of course, the police can also sometimes end up being on the wrong side of the law, given the situation, intentional or not, right? So I want to know from you, how does the system account for these challenges, or would you say these are some unavoidable consequences?
I would not say that they are unavoidable consequences, but they are aberrations that the police leadership has to sort of factor in when any such attempt is being made. Because when you are dealing with people who are unreasonable, who are using violence, and there's a pressure to quickly quell the violence, the temptation is always there among the police forces to find a quick solution, or to set an example. There could also be certain extraneous reasons why a particular individual or a set of individuals or a village is targeted for inhuman treatment or treatment that cannot be justified under law. There's no denying that this happens, and it happens more frequently than one would like it to happen. In fact, it should never happen. But the fact of the matter is that the professional standards that the Indian police should have, at times they fall short. Now, I believe that it is the duty of the police officers at the senior level to not only train their people so that the highest professional standards and respect for rule of law is maintained, but also to ensure that if and when such things happen, those who have done this are identified and punished. And this is not a theoretical construct that I'm giving. This kind of identification of the black sheep or those who have gone astray keeps happening on a regular basis, and such errant police persons are identified and punished on a regular basis. Maybe not as much as the public opinion would want, because whatever punishment is given, it has also to be given within the confines of the conduct rules and other instructions of the government that are prevailing. But it does happen. Both, I must admit, the unnecessary use of force does happen, unfortunately, and identification of such errant elements and their punishment is also something that happens.
Right. So I also wanted to spend a few minutes talking about one of the tactics the Indian state has adopted in fighting insurgency, which is raising civilian counterinsurgency forces. Right. I'm oversimplifying this a bit, but it essentially means the state decides to arm civilians in a particular conflict zone to act in aid of the state and its objectives. So one of the most infamous examples is Salva Judum, which was started in 2005 in Chhattisgarh to counter the Naxalite insurgency in that region, right? And Salva Judum ended up being more or less a disaster because it perpetrated violence, violations of human rights, and so on. Ultimately, the Supreme Court held its creation to be unconstitutional and said that the government should not have raised civilian counterinsurgency force. Similarly, in Kashmir also we have seen village defense guards which were raised in mid 1990s, especially in some Hindu majority areas to protect the people from militants. Last year, the Home Ministry came out with a new scheme for village defense guards, which has sort of resurrected this idea of using civilian counterinsurgency forces. So I want to know your take on opting of such measures in counterinsurgency. Do you think these are legal and justified? What are the risks and benefits of using civilian forces in conflict zones?
Yeah, so the use of such civilian individuals for assisting the police is provided in the law as special police officers. That's the first thing that we need to highlight. The SP of a district has the authority to appoint certain people as special police officers in case he feels that they are necessary for assisting the police in its endeavor of maintaining law and order. Point number one. Secondly, I would like to say that this use of special police officers is a very old thing. 30, 40 years ago, in the dacoity infested ravines of Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh, the villages in those areas were very, very vulnerable to the marauding dacoit gangs. And at that time, roads were not so well developed. The road network was not good. Communication was not good. The police did not have this kind of mobility, etc. So in the remote villages, which were more vulnerable to these gangs, there was a provision for providing weapons to respectable individuals who were expected in the villages, who were expected to use these weapons for the purpose of guarding their village against these marauding dacoit gangs. Now, while identifying whom these weapons were to be given, certain rules, informal and informal, were in place, and the most important one of those was that the person would be such a person who was reliable, who would not use the weapons for ulterior motives, and who had the physical ability and the strength and the willingness to use the weapons that were provided to him by the police to guard the village. So this was done in a very objective manner, and through him, not only did the police have a kind of outpost in the remotest village, but also in terms of firepower, but also through him, the police had some kind of information system going about the activities of the gang. Now, over time, what has happened is that the provision of special police officers has started being used to for purposes which are beyond the professional police purposes, especially in Kashmir, which you talked about. When you start giving weapons to villages on the basis of their religion or their group identity, then obviously you are creating further rift in a very, very volatile and very, very fragile environment. When you do that, you are opening up another front, because now the special police officer is identified not only as an extension of the police force, but as a person belonging to a particular community or group, and therefore, to my mind, he becomes more vulnerable. That's point number one. As far as the Selva Jodum is concerned, I think that was an experiment which I think was an immature and not well thought out project of the Chhattisgarh government, because they started recruiting young boys who were uneducated or semi-educated. They were not given sufficient training, and rather than use them as an adjunct to the police force, they became the front for fighting the left-wing extremism in those areas. Now, that is not what special police officers are meant to be. They are supposed to be a kind of additional manpower available to the police, and not the front line of the fight against any kind of challenge. The result was that large number of them were recruited without the kind of background check that I talked about. That people of respectable background were taken, were given made special police officers. A lot of the people who became Salwa Judum volunteers were people of questionable backgrounds, and they used these weapons to settle their own disputes. Secondly, since they were not well trained, a very large proportion of them fell to the Naxal, bullets, either dead or injured. And the Supreme Court therefore said that it amounts to an abdication of the state's responsibility, in that it was kind of outsourcing its constitutional mandate to a set of people who are neither trained nor equipped nor verified to do that kind of work. So I think special police officers are a traditionally used tool for the police. They are an adjunct to the police. They cannot be used as the main force. And whenever they are used, they should be identified and appointed after much scrutiny, and in very objective conditions, so that they continue to be adjuncts, responsible and accountable adjuncts, and not become some kind of rogue element with weapons provided by the police.
Right, yeah. And I think you mentioned slip-ups during India's fight against insurgency and separatism. And definitely the whole Salva Judum episode counts as a slip-up. Moving on, so I want to focus the light on the police officers who are serving in these conflict zones and situations, because all said and done, they lead a very hard life. It's physically and emotionally and even psychologically taxing to be present in these zones and perform their duties. And in fact, we have seen that a lot of police officers in these high stress environments have suffered from mental illnesses. Many have committed suicides, and some have even committed fratricides and so on, especially among CRPF officers posted in left-wing extremism affected areas. So this is a real problem that the police force faces. So I want to know from you, what is the government doing regards this problem, and what are the support systems that are being put in place to help police officers in coping with these challenges?
You're right that working in that kind of stressful environment, whether it is in left-wing extremist theaters, or in a conflict zone in Kashmir Valley, or in the Northeast, or even in local thanas, where a different kind of tension prevails because of communal issues or caste issues, etc. For someone to spend his whole life in that environment can be very stressful. More so if he is isolated from his family and is unable to, get that kind of warmth when he comes back home. So this is a problem that unfortunately has not been fully addressed by the state or by the government, and that is the reason why increasingly we find police personnel, indulging in fratricide or even committing suicide. I was informed by some officers that the fact that now police personnel even inside the conflict zone have mobile phones through which they are in touch with their families in the villages is another cause of tension, because what is happening is that he's in daily communication with his wife, his family, and others, who come up with their daily problems of the son not studying, of the cow having died, or a father being unwell, and they are unable to do anything about it because they are far away and they don't have the option of just taking leave and going away. So as against the earlier situation where they used to get to know about these things through letters that came after 10 days or 15 days. So this regular touch with the family is often seen as one more reason why there is more stress and a feeling of helplessness amongst the police personnel. In the local thanas, for example, in Bangalore or in Mumbai or in Lucknow for that matter, police personnel mostly are living away from their families. That trend is now changing, but police personnel are living away from their families for large periods of time, or even if they are living with their family, they are unable to spend much time with their loved ones because of the long duty hours, etc., and the uncertain duty hours. With the result that, and their work environment is always very toxic. They are dealing with the scum of the society at all times. So a particular kind of dehumanizing of their psychological makeup happens, and this is a problem that needs to be recognized. It needs to be addressed because it not only causes a psychological problem to the individual, but it also leads to more brutality by the police personnel when they are engaging with the public. So I think this is an area where much needs to be done.
Thank you for illustrating it so well and going over this fraught issue of policing in conflict zones with me today. Thanks once again, Mr. Ahmed, for joining me on Police Chowki, and hope to have you back again soon.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.